Welcome to the session on social heritage. My name is Fiona Colligan and I work with RIS and have the pleasure of introducing the session today. Today's session is part of Stirling's Research Week, a showcase and celebration of Stirling's research. The Research Week is arranged around themes, and today's theme fall under culture, communities and society. This is a theme that challenges us to consider what we learn from the past to inform the future. Our panel today will contribute to our thinking on this, and it is therefore with great pleasure that I hand over to Chiara Bonacchi, who recently joined us here at Stirling. Chiara will lead the session, and she'll also introduce you to Dan Pett and Peter Gould, who have joined us from outside Stirling. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Fiona, for your introduction, and thank you all for joining us. Our session focuses on social heritages, addressing global challenges in contemporary society. And as Fiona was kindly mentioning, I've just joined Stirling as lecturer in heritage, and I'm based in the division of history and politics. And I have invited two distinguished colleagues with whom I've been collaborating for quite a while to join me and reflect upon this theme. One is Dan Pett, who is now head of digital and IT at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge University, and previously lead of digital humanities at the British Museum. And Peter Gould, he's an economist, specializes in the economics of heritage, and is a consultant and researcher for the University of Pennsylvania's Museum of Archaeology, amongst a number of other roles that he's been taking. So together, we would like to introduce an approach to heritage research that is very much interdisciplinary, that draws on intersector collaborations, and is aimed at the generation of social value. I will define social heritages, this label that I've been using, starting with a definition of heritage. Often we might be tempted to think about heritage as things. It's more useful to think about heritage about the processes and the outcomes of interacting with the past, interacting with objects, places, practices from the past, and assigning cultural and social value to these objects, places, and practices in the present. Now, moving on from this definition, we can understand research into social heritage as research that examines human interaction with the past in the context of different human activities that we perform every day, in order to understand how different social actors, how different stakeholders use the past in order to relate to the present, to make sense of the present, to act upon pressing social issues that they're facing at local and also global scale. So it is very much a kind of problem-oriented research that also embraces an understanding of value generation through public investment, in this case via financing of research that aims at achieving missions that look to generate social impact and economic impact, and which, and this is really important, which require cooperation between disciplines and cooperation between different sectors, including the humanities, including heritage. This is recent thinking within economics, for example, put forward by Mariana Mazzucato, professor of public policy, and has been really thinking around ways of reflecting on capitalism and reshaping it in ways that are more sustainable and can produce social value, can allow us to live better lives. So we're going to explore these understanding of social heritages in our talks. Each of us will focus on one specific challenge. I'll be looking at mobility and border control, but also institutional change, discussing research about political identity making in the context of Brexit. Peter Gould will talk about and will address the problem of the economic development of local community versus international large stakeholders through research into heritage tourism and organizational change. And Dampet will look at the problem of digital innovation, how we can achieve it through heritage and through practice and research in digital heritage and museology. So now moving from the introductory part to my actual talk, today I will discuss how the ancient past, from the Iron Age to the early medieval period, has been drawn upon in discussions, public discussions happening on social media and on Facebook particularly, about Brexit. And I will address three core questions. How has the ancient past, again, Iron Age to early medieval, been called upon in social media discussions about Brexit? How have people's perceptions and experience of these periods impacted on people's political identities and the ways in which they have been voting and making decisions on the policies that they would have liked to see implemented, for example, about mobility and border control, which are underlying issues when we talk about Brexit. This is research that has been partly published recently in this article that you see here, which has just appeared in the Journal of Social Archaeology, and it's a co-authored piece together with Marta Shijanka, who's research assistant working with me, and Mark Altawil, who is a colleague based in UCL. The research is part of a larger, bigger project on ancient identities in modern Britain, which has been funded by the AHRC through a substantial grant and entails a collaboration between Stirling University now, Durham Archaeology, Durham Anthropology, and UCL. The project, more broadly, just to give you a bit of context, looks to explore the diversity of heritages that are created from Iron Age, Roman, and early medieval pasts by different stakeholders in Britain. It looks to document the contrasting values that are inherent in these heritages by developing and applied a mixed methodology that works and combines on and offline research and both qualitative and quantitative data-intensive methods. Now, the methodology that I've been using in my study looking at uses of the past in the context of social media discussions about Brexit draws on big data. So we've been mining and analyzing over 1.4 million messages extracted through open source bespoke research software from Facebook. And I will return to this in just a second. First, I would just like to illustrate three core points on the approach that we've been taking, both for this study and the larger project. We've been looking at the public perceptions of the past, taking a longue durée approach, because we're interested in understanding the relative values of different periods and how people are contrasting, opposing, particularly, and we will see this further, the Roman period with earlier and subsequent later periods. Then I'm looking at political activism, as Maricol has defined it, as a form of micro-activism. That is essentially a way that people use on social media to express their political identities and to express the kinds of futures that they would like to see implemented. And again, this is research that has been undertaken online, but moves from an understanding of ethnography as a kind of approach that looks at human activities as they unfold potentially across both online and offline fields. What I mean by this is that, yes, I'm looking at social activism that takes place on social media, but as we will see, a lot of the groups that are behind it are groups established offline. So we're looking at one field of their activity, but there is potential, and indeed this is something we're looking to do, to also integrate some offline work to understand how these groups operate offline and then combine insights from these two avenues. Now, moving to workflows, we have extracted, again, 1.4 million posts, comments, replies from the public Facebook pages that contained the word Brexit in their title. And then we used a set of 568 period-specific keywords to locate those messages within this corpus that featured those periods that we were looking at. And this created a subset of data, which is a bit over 2,500 messages. And then we undertook quantitative and qualitative analysis, including topic modeling, sentiment analysis, and simple term frequencies and term associations, together with close reading. The software is also published, so I have quite a bit of an interest not only in the application of digital technologies to research in heritage as well as to heritage interpretation. The first thing we did was to understand the emergence of this Brexit Facebook sphere, the social actors behind it, and the motivations why they constructed it. We saw that by looking at Facebook pages metadata, about half of the pages were created by groups established offline around a number of different shared characteristics, varying from location to political affiliation or shared social attributes. And the majority of these groups were based in the UK. So this is also a way to, in a way, get insight into the geographics of the social actors playing a role in this discussion, which when it comes to social media is always quite challenging. Now, in terms of motivations, we found a similar number of pages that were set up to campaign for one side or the other on a side, and of pages that were set up without a specific aim, the specific aim of campaigning for one side or the other, but rather for facilitating discussion and, or in more neutral terms, providing news. Then we mapped all the topics that people on these Facebook pages were talking about using topic modeling, and across all the messages we found a wide range of topics. You can see them 15, and including economy, the referendum voting process, negotiations with the EU, mobility of people, social welfare, down to global politics and post-referendum protests. However, when we apply the same method to understand the topics that were discussed in our subset of data of messages where the past was called upon, we found a much less diverse spectrum of topics. And we found that the past was featuring in messages that were very much about ideas of origins and nationalism and cultural otherness, primarily. Then we tried to understand which kind of pasts were drawn upon by leavers and remainers. And we saw that within the subset of data, the words that were featuring the most were Roman, Britannia, and barbar. So words related to the Roman world. Roman was particularly featuring in relation to ideas of power dynamics, mobility and discrimination, militarization, occupation, and resistance. Britannia was appearing a lot because people were mentioning the song Rule Britannia, which is quite nationalist song, or at least this is the context in which it was mentioned, and it invokes interlinked ideas of imperialism, independence, and economic success. With a more qualitative analysis, we were able to really understand that the parallel that was invoked prominently by both sides was a parallel between the Roman Empire and the European Union. This parallel was called upon in a way that to create basically oppositions, as I will further explain, with the previous period and the subsequent period. And these oppositions were then molded into myths of origin, resistance, and collapse. Very simple myths that were used by both sides. Myths of origin were playing around two oppositions. Remainers were stressing that their origins were in the civilizing power of the Roman Empire, opposed to the barbaric people that came before the Romans, who brought civilization. And this is, in a way, also a consequence of a lot of thinking on Romanization that has been partly debunked from the end of the 1980s and the 1990s. And that has, however, filtered and remained strongly within society through the national curriculum. Whereas leavers were stressing that their origins were rather to be found in the freedom of the barbaric people that came before and after the Roman Empire. Resistance. The myth of resistance is really around how people should vote for Brexit in order to resist the dominating power of the Roman Empire. And here is when you find Boudica, and also with a fast forward to the modern period, the British Empire used as symbols of this resistance. And here is also where you see links being immediately drawn between the Roman Empire and the British Empire. And then myths of, and this is clearly a myth used by leavers, and then myths of collapse used by both. In one case, the collapse of Britain being compared to the collapse of the Roman Empire, should it leave the European Union? In the other case, should it remain within the European Union? So what can we really say? Both of these camps are using in a similar way, using similar myths and playing on similar dualities, the Iron Age to the early medieval past. And this should make us really think about how experts have been communicating about these ideas, and also how we can, in a way, promote, also through education, and again, the national curriculum, a more critical rather than simplified teaching of certain ideas, and challenge what is still, at least for the national curriculum in England, a prominent presence of the Roman period over, for example, the Iron Age period, which has only recently been introduced. And also how it is important to think about the long-term impact of expert practices. As I have shown, there's been much greater impact of practices of the past than there is of practices of the present. So ways of thinking also of the temporality of this impact. We should not only look at the impact of experts that say things now, but what has been done for decades up to now. And finally, we've been finding supporting evidence of for the hypothesis that was proposed by Andrew Gardner, who hypothesized a correlation between identifying with Britishness and being pro-Europe, and identifying instead with more local identities, and particularly Englishness, and being pro-Leave. So what he theorizes is really the resurgence of more local identities in support of Brexit and non-European ways forward, which are much more similar to the local identities that existed before Roman times. Thank you. This is the end. There is a picture of Nigel Farage because this study has been, I'm trying to pursue those avenues for impact on teaching and policy. And as part of that, the study has been covered also by the Times and the Telegraph. And now I'm studying the impact of this communication to understand how we can really engage with the results of this research in order to move forward, and how the media can or not help to do this. Now, I would like to just, having reached the end of my presentation, leave the floor to Peter Gould.
Got it. Okay. Going up and down, right? Okay. Thank you very much, Chiara. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me here today. My charge is to talk to you about another of the challenges facing archaeology and cultural heritage management. That is the increasing recognition that archaeological sites, museums, and other heritage resources have important economic value in addition to their social, cultural, historical, and other intrinsic merits. Realizing that value for the benefit of communities has become an important practical and ethical consideration in the field. My intention is to explore both the conditions under which heritage resources successfully generate economic development and to discuss the conditions under which the benefits of that development flow to the communities associated with archaeological sites and heritage resources. This report is based on research that I conducted in Tuscany with my colleague Anna Paterlini when she was with University College London and the American University of Rome. There can be no question about the economic importance of archaeological sites, museums, and other cultural heritage to the economies of cities and nations everywhere on Earth. We see this at Petra, where the World Travel and Tourism Council estimates the total economic impact of tourism accounts for nearly 19% of Jordan's gross domestic product. We see it in Europe's cities and countryside, from Rome's Colosseum to Austria's castles to the Catholic heritage of Ireland. Even bustling manufacturing and service economies like Japan still host a substantial heritage tourist trade. Emerging nations in the South, like Peru, depend critically on tourism for foreign exchange, foreign investment, and the job-creating benefits of foreign visitation. With the establishment of the World Heritage List in 1972, UNESCO entrenched the idea that cultural heritage was both a global resource to be managed and, through the World Heritage Site label, a marketing brand to be coveted. ICOMOS declared heritage a driver for development in 2011. While the advantages of exploiting heritage for development are evident worldwide, the question remains, how does it happen and who really benefits? As a practical matter in most places today, the answer to the latter question is that international corporations, well-connected national elites, and powerful local actors generally take the lion's share of heritage tourism benefits. That is because conventional approaches to heritage management align with the structure and dynamics of the tourism industry to favor national and international businesses over local communities. In today's discussion, I want to highlight 5 challenges that I suggest are critical to achieving heritage-related development that delivers benefits at the local level. First, we need to challenge the prevailing view that heritage is a public good and the consequential belief that government and government alone is suited to manage cultural heritage resources. Second, in contention with the first, is the parallel reality that we must invest to help local communities acquire the skills to manage heritage-related tourism businesses. Third, heritage practitioners often fail to understand the structure of the tourism industry and fail to appreciate the value of connections among industry participants and the public. Fourth is the reality that the real driver of success in this context is often financing and technical support, both access to them and the form in which they are provided. Finally, another limiting factor is the need to understand the nature of governance institutions that are required if community-based efforts to manage heritage resources and heritage tourism are to be sustainable and locally beneficial. I want to address these issues by focusing on a case study from Tuscany in Italy. The network of heritage sites known as I Parchi della Val di Cornia is located on a peninsula in Tuscany that is home to the city of Piombino and neighboring seaside resorts and medieval hill towns. It is a region of iron, lead, and silver mining that had its origins in the Etruscan era and was a source for the prosperity of medieval Florence and Siena. Up to the latter half of the previous century, the region was a center of iron and steel production in Italy. However, globalization of the steel business brought that prosperity to an end, and by the early 1990s, the region was desperate for a new model. Riccardo Frankovic, an archaeologist who explored the nearby medieval mining town of Rocca San Silvestro, dedicated his life to the Maremma region that includes the Val di Cornia. Distressed by the economic malaise, Frankovic conceived of a network of archaeological resources on which to build a new economy based on tourism. He persuaded the national government to deviate from conventional practice in Italian archaeological management and support a new venture. This would be a public-private partnership of 5 local communities and 13 local businesses. The partnership, incorporated as Parchi della Val di Cornia SPA, was authorized to take over from the government responsibility for managing and maintaining Rocca San Silvestro, the nearby Etruscan site of Barati, and the Roman site of Papallonia. It was to maintain these sites, conduct archaeological research under the supervision of the Superintendenza, and administer all of the tourist venues within the park system. This was an approach unheard of in Italy and much of the rest of the world at the time. The new venture opened the 3 archaeological parks in 1996 with substantial financial support from the European Union, the Italian government, and some private donors. By 2013, the park system had grown to include 3 archaeological sites, 2 major beach attractions, 2 large woodland parks, and 3 archaeological museums. As a community development venture, the park system has been a tremendous success. Tourism into the region grew by only over 40% per year, twice the rate of tourism growth in Tuscany as a whole. And the tourists were of a new type. Piombino is the ferry port for travelers to Napoleon's Isle of Exile on Elba, but those tourists rarely stay in the area. By contrast, studies by my colleague Anna Paterlini demonstrated that visitors to the Val di Cornia parks vacationed in the area for an average of 12 days. They not only visited the beaches, but also the archaeological sites and the museums. Nearly half of the tourists Paterlini studied came primarily from other EU countries, especially Germany. They said they were drawn to the Val di Cornia by the combination of natural, archaeological, and museum attractions. Moreover, 3/4 of those interviewed said they intended to return to the region on vacation, and the most common reason they gave was, quote, "There is more I'd like to visit," unquote. The Val di Cornia parks are today at the heart of a thriving tourism business that benefits all of the towns in this district of Tuscany. While the economy has prospered, the park system itself has foundered due to actions by governments that undermined its successful model. In 2004, reflecting the public good paradigm in archaeology, the Italian government passed new laws that forbade the involvement of private sector parties in the management of Italy's archaeological patrimony. As a result, the park system was compelled in 2007 to buy out all of the private sector partners. What had been a successful public-private partnership became instead an agency administered by 5 governmental shareholders. Moreover, since Piombino was the only town with resources to enable that transition, it became the majority controlling shareholder of the company. The park's ties to the private sector businesses and local citizenry were severed, and the park system operated alone, an awkward collaboration of local governments. For a few years, matters proceeded. By 2011, the park system was able to cover 95% of its costs from earned revenue, receiving only modest subsidies from the 5 partner governments. However, Italy's financial collapse in that year, following hard on the global recession of 2008, derailed the progress. In the wake of the 2011 financial crisis, Italian government funding for Piombino was slashed and service cuts loomed. The town's mayor turned to the revenues of the park system as a source of funding for his town's social service priorities. As the principal shareholder in the company, Piombino was able to withhold funds otherwise used to cover the park's operating costs. This action precipitated a crisis that sent the park system reeling. Hours were curtailed, staff were released, research projects suspended, management ranks thinned, revenues collapsed, and deficits grew. The park system is still operational today, and it is on the mend, but after expelling its private partners in 2007, the park system also failed to maintain close ties to the business community in the Val di Cornia. Thus, when the crisis hit, public support for the park system had waned despite its important economic role. The park was left without advocates at the moment that it most needed help. Only in the past couple of years have park officials begun the task of rebuilding the network of relationships it needs to preserve the organization into the future. The Parque della Val di Cornia story contains several lessons for practitioners seeking to use heritage resources for community economic development. The first is that clusters of sites are far better attractions than standalone museums or archaeological sites. Moreover, the clustering effect simultaneously stimulates beneficial competition and cooperation. Competition occurs among tourism businesses, including local artisans, which forces innovations that improve the visitor experience. Yet mutual interest, the need to attract tourists, also impels cooperation among them. The larger number of sites and associated hospitality venues in a cluster means it is less costly for suppliers to service them. More widespread demand for skilled workers creates growth opportunities for local residents who can improve their prospects by switching jobs within the cluster region. Tour operators and travel agencies can justify organizing trips to places with a broader array of activities to occupy tourists. Investors in hotels and restaurants see a greater likelihood of positive financial returns, and governmental or NGO experts can see stronger payoff from time and money invested in cluster communities. Co-opetition is the name often given to the synergies and stimulative effects that clusters have on businesses and communities. As was learned the hard way in the Val di Cornia, even more important than the physical venues are the networks of relationships among site managers, local businesses, government agencies, outside experts like archaeologists, and the public. Successful economic development is not just about places. It is about creating the ecosystem of supporting organizations and businesses that deliver tourists to the place, provide them with the services that make the visit a successful experience, and provide the behind-the-scenes infrastructure of goods and services that make it all possible. It is this assemblage of private and public sector entities acting through formal and informal webs of business and personal relationships that delivers the tourist experience. In industry, this is known as a supply chain. This concept acknowledges that a variety of actors are necessary to deliver a successful tourist experience and highlights the important interconnections among them. Transportation services, hospitality services, financial and managerial support organizations, local artisans and retail businesses and residents, they all need to work in sync. Such collaborations are especially vital in sites that are clustered and may be critical in standalone museums or archaeological sites. Often this collaboration is engineered through community organizations devoted to the tourism business, which are called destination management organizations, or DMOs. Successful tourism development depends on having every element of the tourism experience delight visitors, from the first airplane flight to the final taxi ride to the airport to go home. That happens through coordinated supply chains. A third lesson from the Val di Cornia relates to the challenges it has faced since 2012. That lesson is twofold. First, the Italian government's to ban private sector parties from managing archaeological sites destroyed a promising experiment in public-private partnership. Heritage is often characterized as a public good. To an economist, that term has a very specific and limited meaning. Public goods are resources that we all want to use, and they are resources we generally are able to use without interfering with one another. They are goods we desire that the private market will never provide profitably. Public parks are a classic example. We look to governments to provide public goods. When the public good label is applied to cultural heritage, the result in most of the world is the conclusion that governments must own, control, and manage all of the nation's patrimony. This precludes alternatives such as public-private partnerships, which is what happened in the Val di Cornia in 2007. Today, in a time of increasing demand for basic government services and austerity policies that threaten heritage funding, government control of heritage translates into perilous prospects for preservation and frustrates local initiatives to create heritage-based economic development. Thus, another lesson from the Val di Cornia experience is that austerity and rising demand for social services make it critical for archaeologists to make a better case for supporting heritage. Doing so requires new tools and metrics. It is no accident that the Heritage Lottery Fund is taken to studying its contribution to the UK economy every year or so, nor is it a coincidence that the EU has funded a massive study of the many, but mostly economic ways that, quote, cultural heritage counts for Europe, unquote. These are efforts to prove to governments that spending on cultural heritage is in fact a valid use of taxpayer money. Private funders, foundations, and individual philanthropists are also looking intensely for evidence of the positive social impact of their giving. Finally, I'd like to draw upon both the Val di Cornia experience and work I've done in other countries, summarized in my recent book, to suggest lessons the Italian experience suggests for emerging economies like Peru and Belize. The first of these is that the issue of devolution, enabling local communities to be an active part of managing their heritage, perhaps even controlling it, is even more important in countries with large-scale poverty and complex local cultures. Governments need to accept the risk that sites may be damaged in order to empower communities to take responsibility for their heritage. For that to be successful, two considerations are paramount. First, local community organizations need to be able to govern their own affairs. My studies of such organizations suggest that sustainable organizations never result when government officials or heritage experts bring their pet solutions to town. Rather, sustainable organizations are founded by local people and have substantial local participation. Their rules and governing procedures are developed locally and democratically. Rules are custom fit to local conditions and preclude any individuals or factions from gaining control to the disadvantage of the group. Financial management is highly transparent in order to build confidence among members, and when rules are broken, sanctions are applied by the group itself, not by outsiders. Second, have no illusion that outside help is not important. In the projects of the Sustainable Preservation Initiative, of which I am a director, we have learned that fledgling organizations absolutely need financial assistance, and they need much more. They need capacity building training in everything from financial management to assistance with production techniques, marketing, and distribution of their products. However, we also know that this support needs to be light touch. That is, the community members must remain the leading force in the organization, with outside financial or expert supporters providing assistance in a manner that will respect and support the community's efforts, not supplant them. Eventually, if the organization is to be sustainable, it must operate without the involvement or money of outside benefactors. Am I out of time? Okay, I'm out of time. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to talk about innovation in the digital sphere. Innovation for me is more really about applying ideas and seeing whether other people can replicate them. I don't really think anyone really innovates too much in digital now. They see what other people are doing and think that's a good idea, and then try and apply it for themselves. So let's start off with Japan. Japan is one of those places where lots of ideas come out very regularly. Pokemon Go came from Japan, but everywhere you go, you see signs like this. This is at Neo Castle in Kyoto. They don't want you to play with Pokemon Go in places like this. Museums in this country found Pokemon Go very, very challenging. People walking around their museums, not looking at the objects, but playing games. I really like that idea. It disrupts the space. Some people won't. Museum directors found it really challenging when they found out what people were doing. A Pokemon Go gym in their museum, what happens next? Well, people were coming and enjoying themselves. They spent money in the shop. It's an economic driver. It doesn't always happen like that, though. And this is really key for the museum sector and heritage. People spend too much time building things, hoping people will come there. They don't do research about why they actually want those things in the first place. This comes out of strategy, and I think it's a really important quote. What can we be in the museum digital space? There's all sorts of things that museums should be doing now. I'll probably wave my arms around quite a bit. They should be participatory. If you want to read stuff about this, look for Nina Simon's work on the internet. She writes about this a lot. It should be serendipitous, definitely. You don't really know what people are going to do with your resources. And relevancy. How do you make your institution relevant? Now, this is somewhere where you can innovate or make good ideas come out very quickly. And you should be world-leading if you're a big museum. Even a small museum could be world-leading, try different things out, if it's agile and does different things. Openness is really hard for museums. They don't like being open about ideas. They think they're not neutral. That's not the case. Every museum's got a bias running through it. The collectors who bought things in the first place, the people who work there, the management. It needs to be reproducible as well. Anything that I create where I work now, I want any of you to be able to redo as well. And I hope I might inspire you, but I possibly won't because I'm quite boring. So what sort of challenges are out there? Well, licensing. We had a very good discussion at lunchtime about the restrictive nature of licensing in museums. They think the objects belong to them. They're quite often funded by the state or by local authorities. You pay your taxes and that's where things come from. Trustees have got a vision about how they think museums should be run, or archaeological services, or other sort of heritage organisations. Senior management perhaps don't understand the potential of the digital world. I know for a fact they don't understand the potential of the digital world because I got released from the British Museum because of that. And they don't respond very well to disruptive technology. And immersion is very here and now. You're going to hear far too much talk about virtual reality in the near future. Virtual reality is still quite clunky. How many of you are sort of 1970s children and probably remember the sort of huge headsets? Nah, hasn't really changed. There's still huge headsets. The experience is crap, basically. So we also need to move away from seeing digital as an enterprise activity and about how it changes really quickly. We're not going to make things that last for 5 years and just leave it there, which is the general tendency. And it won't go away. Digital is there for every part of your life. So we should base ourselves on 3 open pillars. Open source technology. We can't afford expensive technology. Creative Commons licenses to allow people to reuse information. And open data. Sorry, Chiara, did you want to take a picture of that?
Thank you.
So Chiara made sure that I talked about this project. This is something that we've worked on for about 4 years and it's still ongoing now. It's a crowdsourcing project that's based on open source technology. And it allows the public to get interactive with archaeological research. It's out there at the moment. There's about 5 projects on there. Society of Antiquaries, which Peter and I are a fellow of, have got a project up there, digitising royal seals at the moment. And Andrew Prescott, who some of you might know, thought this was a really innovative project for the funding stream. We thought it was good fun. It's still going. We're funding it ourselves out of our own pocket now. How much do you think it costs to run a service like this? Not very much. It's $5 a month on Amazon Cloud at the moment. So this is an example of structured data capture for the Bronze Age Index. Do you want to leave that up so you take a picture? Are you okay? You've seen it enough. So museums think they're very, very innovative spaces. This is the British Museum using audio guide technology, or allow people to take pictures. It's not really that innovative anymore. Where we are starting to innovate is around experimentation around code. Things like doing facial recognition from pictures, about trying to do machine data learning sets. This stuff is not difficult. You can learn really quickly. There's lots of examples out there. This is where people will be going in the future. And we started to do interesting things as well. Many of you might recognise these objects, the Rosetta Stone. I got in the case with this. I was actually quite disappointed actually, when I got up close. The hieroglyphics are really, really shallow, but I had to take my shoes off. And unfortunately, I'm wearing sports socks that day, so just ignore what I'm wearing. And we're also trying to publish data so that people can reuse it. Now, this is academic publishing of archaeological data with a digital object identifier, an ORC ID. I want people to take my data and repurpose it. Now, this didn't go down very well with the British Museum either, because they lost control of this information. As soon as you put stuff on the web, you lose control. And that's something museums and heritage people aren't really happy with. So we were scanning objects and trying to create them into an economic driver as well. So these objects here were turned into 3D casts and sold in the British Museum shop. Not many of them are sold, but we've proved that you can turn this into a revenue stream if you want to make money out of what you're doing. But you can download these models, open source models, and you could do the printing at home for yourself and still have them in your house if you wanted to. So virtual reality has potential to enhance museums and archaeology and heritage. However, if any of you have tried it, you might get motion sickness, you might fall off your chair after trying it, sometimes sit down when you're trying it out. And it's very lightweight virtual reality as well. This is Oculus VR. Now, when they came to work with the British Museum, they took lots of 360-degree photos and then wondered were there any resources out there so they could actually make it more interesting. They found out that I'd made lots of 3D models of this gallery. So every morning when I walked into work, I walked down this gallery. And I took my camera with me and just decided I'll take a photograph of that. And it seems elaborated making 3D models. So they had all these resources they could actually use in that environment. And they've now got a virtual reality environment where you could click on an object and you can turn it around in 360 degrees and actually experience it. Museum management worry that no one will come to look at that gallery now. What a load of rubbish. People want to go and experience this space. They want to go there with friends. They want to talk about it. It's like going to a concert. You want to hear the music. You don't not go because you've got the record in your house. Okay, so these are 3D models that were sold in the shop as well. You've got 4 different types here in different materials. You've got plaster, you've got gypsum, you've got resin, and I can't remember what the last one is, possibly fiberglass. They only managed to sell one of these objects, which I was quite surprised about, seeing as it's religious tat. If you go to a cathedral, people buy all sorts of this sort of stuff there. So one of the things I also wanted to do is encode our curatorial knowledge in the objects. So this is a scan of something, I probably should have said trigger warning actually, it's human remains. Sorry, I shouldn't put that on screen without telling you. So this is from Jericho, this is Jericho skull. The curator decided she'd like a 3D model. I spent half an hour scanning this with the camera. It's about the size of a football, it's really quite quick to do. And I asked the curator to go in there and annotate it, to tell people what things meant. So you learn about the plaster face and how it was pushed out with material behind it to keep the jaw out. It's an interesting case, it allows people to move things around. And then we had an exhibition which was sponsored by Google. Did anyone go to room 3 at the British Museum and see this, apart from Chiara? When Chiara went, it actually didn't work because the Wi-Fi was overloaded, but that's a different story. So what Google did, they focused on one object, which is this stela from the Amravati temple in India, which is at the front, and then they blew it up onto the back wall and turned it into a hotspot environment using mobile phones to connect. You didn't download an app, you used Wi-Fi and connected to Wi-Fi. You turned it into a pointer. Now there was a video, which you would have seen here, but I don't think it's going to play. It moving around. And imagine Buddhist chanting. That was the atmosphere in the background. So you used your mouse and you clicked on the hotspot, you got the information, and you could turn it around as well. And right, now imagine these people on the wall, because this video is not going to play either. There's still Buddhist chanting going on. You highlight over the top of them, and it plays a video. You cannot play multiple videos at once, but one in turn. It told you the story of the devotees on the frieze. I've just been out to Abu Dhabi for a convention at the Louvre. Now this is a brand new museum. It's a blank canvas. It allows people to do exactly what they want. There's so much room for scope and invention in there compared to the museums that have been established for years. So there's a couple of examples of the interactives they put in there. They've got huge touch tables, really huge. They're massive. They're 6 screens long. And then they're using 3D printing to allow tactile experience around the objects and braille. It's because it's a brand new museum you can do this. You don't get many chances to revamp a museum. And then if any of you have been to Cleveland, this is Gallery 1. This is a fantastic exhibition with massive touchscreens as well. Now imagine how much money you need to do this sort of work. It's a lot. Most local museums can't do this, so there's a big digital divide that stops museums doing this, or archaeological organisations. So if you've got money, you can do lots of things. If you can have access to hardware and someone who's got open source code, you might be able to implement this, but normally it's out of your reach. And then there's some fantastic work coming out of Switzerland. Well, this actually came out of Australia originally. So this is from Sarah Kenderdine, who, if you haven't seen her speak at TED, look it up. It's a really fantastic talk about the potential of how you can use virtual reality or computer simulations to enhance people's experience. And this is an example of Kung Fu, and she's trying to capture intangible heritage. So she's videoing people doing Kung Fu moves and recording their motion and putting them online so people can see how the sport has evolved over time. And then many of you might have heard about the Cooper Hewitt Museum. They've been trying some other digital disruption as well. They have a pen that you take around the museum and you scan objects with a little barcode. And it goes onto this device and you go back to the end and you scan it again and it comes up with what you've been seeing and you can go home and get an email showing you exactly what you've seen. And then there's scope for other digital innovation as well at the moment. People are now starting to get together to come up with shared standards and ways of working. Al, who's been sitting at the back, has been involved in this as well. It's quite an interesting programme, and it did seem a little bit of in isolation when it first started. Now they're talking to lots more people. And this is where you can get involved. At some point, this will go out to the community and ask you to comment on why this sort of thing should be good. And that's where we can digitally innovate in a different way. We can talk and make things better. And if we don't talk, they won't improve. And if you've got an opinion on this, you have to say it. Don't just sit there and moan when it gets published. That's your chance to actually say things. And that's it, because I think we're possibly out of time.